I wasn't going to do a second video on restoring files from a DVD or a CD, but I realized that some people might be a little ticked off that I just dismissed the actual restoring of the file with the single line statement, "You can replace displaying the files in a list box with one command in order to do the restore." Some people are going to go, "I don't know what to do. I don't know. You're supposed to show me." No, I know you macho programmers don't talk that way. But basically, what you need to do is specify an archive directory, which is a directory that the DVD needs to be copied to. And once again, these things could be done a million ways, and depending on how you back up your data and how you want to restore your data, I'm just taking an arbitrary path here. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking the string C:/backup/ and concatenating it with the name we get from the top directory on the DVD in order to create the archive directory, which I thought is a cool way to do it, because if the name of the directory is significant, you can be able to see right away in the backup directory what the significant data is, by just the names of the subdirectories. And the drive info class and the directory info class and the path class are pretty much used identically to the previous video, so I'll just skip going over them at all. We're adding another class, a directory class, and we're using the exist method to check whether the directory we're creating, the archive directory, already exists. And if it already exists, we're cool, we don't need to worry about it. But if it doesn't exist, we need to do a create directory method from the same directory class in order to create it. And the nice thing about create directory is it'll actually create multiple levels of directories. So if we have like C:/backup/ Christmas music, and we don't even have the backup directory on C, it'll create both those directories, both the backup and the Christmas music. So that's kind of cool. It takes care of a lot of problems. Don't have to recursively create directories or something. And then the file info class we're pretty much using identically to the way we did in the first video, which was video 158. This should be video 159. So if you haven't watched the first video, I definitely recommend going back and watching it, or this video isn't going to make that much sense. But the copy to is the one command I was saying you could replace rather than showing to the list box in order to copy from the DVD to the archive directory. But I could just have added that one command, copy to, and use predefined data and everything. But I thought we'd do it cooler than that, because if we're going to do another video, we might as well make it cool, have some cool stuff in it. So I'm also using the refresh method of the list box and the text box in order to show real-time updating data, so you can see the files actually being copied as they're copied, and you can see the list box with the count. Instead of just immediately has the number of files, it goes up from 1 to the number of files while they're being copied. And then I use the set selected method on the list box, because if you don't do that, the list box will start to fill up and it'll just go past the bottom and you can't scroll it down while it's being written to. So with the set selected method, I just set the current file being copied via set selected, and that way the list itself scrolls up as the files are being copied, and you always see the current file being copied as well as a history in the ones above. And the last thing I added was a try catch block to check whether the file we're restoring already exists. And if it does, I basically just pop up a message box and don't have anything disastrous happening, because it would be an exception if it existed with the copy to. So I catch that exception from the copy to and we just keep processing. But I basically just leave the file there. I don't copy over it, which is another thing you could change depending on how you want to do it. You might want to copy the restoring file over it, and you could do that just by doing a delete and the try and rewrite. So you could write over if you want, but I'm not. Well, if we bring up the root directory of the computer I'm using, Sarah, you can see there is no backup directory, let alone a backup / Christmas music. So we don't have to worry about files already existing because the directory doesn't even already exist. So if we compile and run the code I've been talking about, see it looks pretty much like the first video. It shows the drive of the DVD and the root directory, the top directory that's on the DVD that has the files, and the concatenation of the drive letter and the root directory. But then if we hit restore backup files, you see in real time it shows the numbers increasing from 1 to 119, and it shows the file that's currently being written. Unfortunately, that happens so fast you practically can't see it because these files are extremely small. In fact, the 119 MP3s only took up about half of a CD, whereas 119 files normally would fill a CD if they'd even fit. So these are pretty small MP3s. But one thing we can take advantage of is the try-catch loop. If we go and look at the code, basically in the form load, what's happening is the code's pretty much identical in terms of the directory info and getting an array of directory info and checking that there's only one directory name, and then using path.combine to combine the drive name with the top directory name. But one thing that's different is we're creating the archive directory name and concatenating C:/backup/ with the top directory name we got, and then adding a / at the end because we're going to be concatenating file names on it. And then we check if the file exists, and if it doesn't exist, the bang means doesn't. So this is saying not directory exists. Then we create the directory using the create directory method. Both the exists and the create directory method are methods of the directory class, which this is the first time we're using the directory class actually. And then from that point on it's identical to the original code. But in the button handler for the backup files button, I changed the text to restore files instead of list files because now we actually are restoring them. You see we get the file info from the directory info object using the get files, but we set a counter equal to 0 rather than taking the length of this array and putting that number in the text box right away just to say there's this many files. And then in the for each loop we increment this counter so it's updated real time and then written to the text box with counter 2 strings since it's an integer, and the text box is then refreshed. We have to have a refresh both on the text box or the list box or this won't work. You know, it'll just do the copy as quickly as possible and then it'll update all the controls and we won't see them update real time. So in order to see them update real time we have to do a refresh on both the text box and the list box. But another thing that's different is the list box we do a set selected using our counter as the number of the entry to select. So the first time through it's going to be 0 since we don't increment the counter until after this, and since the list box is 0 based. So we're taking advantage of that by incrementing after we do the set select. And the true just says to set it to selected. If it were false it would be unselected. So the advantage of doing the set selected is it selects the current file being copied, which puts it at the bottom of the list box and pushes the list box up rather than it disappearing below the list box and are not being able to see it until all the files are copied. So as I say, the trouble is this worked too fast. We can hardly see it because the files are so small. If I had like 1 gig files, you'd definitely see it. But this time when we run it, we'll be getting an error on every single file because they exist for every one. And that try catch block will just pop up a message box with the exception message, which is file already exists or something like that. So if we do the restore backup files, we get the list box or the message box, that says file backup Christmas music and the name already exists. And you say OK, and then that file name appears in the list box, and we get the 1 counter that gets written into the text box. And then if we say OK again for the next one, the same thing happens. So we can actually see this running in slow motion, see what's going on. And as we go down to the end, we'll get a scroll bar because we've run out of room. But you notice instead of this file disappearing below the bottom, which it would if we didn't have the set select, or set selected, it's still visible on the bottom of the screen because the set selected says you want to see what's selected. So if we keep going, we see the list box scrolling up, and we also see the number going up of the count of the files, which is kind of cool. This kind of real-time display is excellent if you have huge files, which I usually do. I'm usually copying between hard drives rather than doing a restore off a DVD, and some of my files are absolutely huge. They're horrendous. They're like 10, 16 gigabytes. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot from it. And it wasn't originally meant to be a two-parter, but I think a lot of the information is new, especially the real-time display information. So I think it all worked out for the best. Well, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe, and I'll see you next video.